Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Hope you're having a fantastic day. We're doing things a little different here for the weekend. Just kind of go ahead and round out a few different coins all in one video. We're going to cover Bitcoin volatility, total market cap, Bitcoin dominance, and just kind of get a well-rounded understanding of the macro perspective of Bitcoin and specific altcoins here that are fan favorites, at least for my community. That being said, I hope you have a great learning experience here. Let's go ahead and start off with the back-end liquidation data here for Bitcoin and kind of see roughly where we're at. So this is the last 7 days worth of liquidation on the left, and if we do see here, we can recognize there's a distinct amount of liquidation above the price between 111 and 112, but that's more local, not really something we need to worry too much about. I think the macro is kind of more important, recognizing that we have liquidated pretty much every single short in the market, minus this significantly large position at about 120,000. Outside of that, I think we're more likely to continue to go sideways and maybe a little bit further down. And I'll explain more so why I mean that. Mainly because liquidation delta for Bitcoin is significantly large. In other words, this maintains itself for too long, it's more likely to go down than up, just based on natural, buy and sell, and more so just supply and demand at this point. There's a lot of people that are going to start trying to short here soon. All that being said, we look at open interest for Bitcoin. We can see 118,000 is that current area of resistance, which is holding pretty strong. We got the most amount of volume there, therefore implying that is a resistance for us. So let's go ahead and kind of start here, get started with the total Bitcoin volatility index here. Basically, this is the last, this is a 7-day index, kind of letting us know that as soon as the price broke outside of its all-time high, volatility has increased. Okay, so this is on Thursday at roughly 1 p.m. Pacific. That's exactly when the price broke its all-time high, and we can see a significant amount of continuation higher here. So that just kind of lets us know that people are doing the shut up and take my money strategy at this point, just kind of FOMOing in before it's too late. Keep in mind, there's usually corrective patterns that happen because of that. Taking a look here at crypto market, this is basically a total market cap here, excluding Bitcoin. So this gives us a representation that altcoins, including Ethereum and stablecoins, are on their way down, and we see a little bit of a pivot here. Now, this doesn't matter too much. These numbers aren't specific, but this does help us understand the transition that we're going through right now, and that it's normal for the amount of total market capitalization to go down when Bitcoin hits a tentative top. Okay, so more likely than not, we're going to see the price continue lower. Speaking of lower, this is almost an inverse scenario here. Essentially, Bitcoin dominance is a good indication of where Bitcoin's at versus that of the total market amount in the market right now. So the amount of volatility and everything that we've looked at so far kind of tells us that we're seeing that shift in momentum here. We got Bitcoin dominance on its way down, and overall, even though we've seen it increase a little bit here locally with Bitcoin going sideways and altcoins going down, this is generally speaking not a favorable situation. If we do take a look actually at our, here I got our Discord, we have an education section here. This kind of gives us an indication of where we're at right now. Bitcoin dominance is on its way down, and the price of Bitcoin is on its way down. So we should start to see stability in altcoins here soon. I'm willing to speculate, as long as we don't see a significant correction to the upside for Bitcoin dominance, we're going to start seeing altcoins do pretty well and bottom out here soon. We'll talk more about that later in the video, so be sure to stick around. Another thing I want to talk about here would be Bitcoin CME Futures. Let's talk about this. This is an important aspect of understanding how specific coins are moving and where they may move next. In other words, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana all have futures currently, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, XRP is on the docket there. But either way you look at it, for now, starting with Bitcoin, we can recognize here that there's a CME gap between 114.4 thousand and 115.7 thousand. Now, that excludes what's happened so far with the closure at 118,000, right? Because the price action is below that. So we actually have two CME gaps total, one previously from when the market moved way too fast on Thursday, and then another one that's forming now as of the weekend. So we don't want to speculate that, but for right now, it makes a lot of sense to see the price action for Bitcoin to continue lower to fill that gap. And if you look at the daily time frame, there's also a fair value gap as low as 112,500. That's essentially the previous all-time high. So there is potential for us to see a retest that 112 area. If so, 112,000 seems like a very logical place to consider along. So that's Bitcoin. Taking a look here at ETH, same thing as well. There's a gap between 28.5 and 29.25. So basically that $75 gap there essentially created from Thursday. Once more, that does exclude the current CME gap being created right now based on the closure from CME Futures yesterday. Same thing here as well. Solana has a very small gap. This isn't one to worry too much about. This is actually one of those opposite occurrences where Solana's price is below that CME gap, so that's technically already been filled. So what we might actually see is the inverse, we're going to probably see a pretty significant continuation higher for Solana come Monday, based on the fact that we're trying to fill this gap, the new gap that's being formed right now, because we technically close at 163.50, and at this point the price of Solana is 158 and some change, right? So just something to be mindful of. All right, so let's go ahead and do a quick summary here for the top 5 coins here. Once more, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, SUI, and XRP. These are my fan favorites for my community, so I figured I'd just go ahead and compile them all in one video. And you let me know again in the comments below if you like this new format, if you prefer one video with everything to rule them all. That was a terrible, terrible Lord of the Rings reference. Or if you prefer the separate videos, let me know. Either way, Bitcoin, let's jump into here. These are the kind of the more important macro things we want to understand, okay? Once more, at the end of the week, it's generally best to kind of get a summary of where we're at. And obviously, starting with the weekly here, which hasn't technically closed yet, we have a significant bullish engulfing type of candle here. It's engulfing the previous bullish candle, right? So technically it's not an engulfing candle. The whole point we mentioned this though is that that's a very strong amount of volume. We're seeing a significant amount of volume for an unclosed candle already, and we've broken above a lot of key levels here on the weekly. So the weekly looks pretty strong. The daily time frame is also looking pretty good, but it's starting to come back to reality here. So as the RSI tapers off and the price goes sideways, that's a bullish type of convergence that we're looking for. So in a perfect world, Bitcoin goes sideways for another couple of days, we see our RSI calm down, and then we get prepared to go ahead and go long again. That's essentially what we're looking for. But for right now, the overall sentiment is that everything's very positive on the daily time frame. While we do have a stochastic swing to the downside, or at least it's forming, I wouldn't expect a monumental pullback. It just doesn't make a ton of sense, especially with how much volatility is in the market. Once more, the volatility index is telling us we're more likely to go higher. Overall, I think Bitcoin's looking super strong. Let's take a look quickly here at Ethereum as well and kind of understand where we're at here. So I need to update my fib levels. Keep in mind, I do post playout charts available on Twitter, Telegram, and Discord, so that will be available for you too as of watching this video. But when we look here, we do have a pretty significant resistance range for Ethereum. So looking at the bigger picture, that previous macro resistance was effectively a support range for ETH when it broke above 3,000. It held there pretty well, but once we lost that range, that's provided pretty significant resistance for us. So the overall sentiment here is that Ethereum's still looking pretty strong in the overall sense, but we got to recognize that we're in a situation where the price action may pull back to retest the local highs. And that's a very common occurrence. So when it comes to deviations and just current resistance and support ranges, when we look here, previous high of roughly 2880, that seems like a logical place for the price action to pull back to, which is already kind of doing so, right? It's came really close to that already. We've also got a fair value gap here at about 2800, and that's a significant range that we want to recognize could very well be retested before the next leg up. So me personally, I generally like to wait for fair value gaps to get filled before I take entry. So I'm going to consider a thought of taking a long if we're still above our ascending trend at the $2,800 mark. That's my consensus, right? So I'm still bullish on ETH. And in fact, quick little congrats to our community here, just kind of so you understand. We did take some solid profit off of ETH, BNB, XRP, and I guess Dogwif had another one there. So we had a pretty solid week there, but ETH was our big moneymaker there because it was a more recent trade that we had opened up and got a good 57% in 2 days. And that was that cup and handle pattern I discussed previously, where we basically took that trade as a retest of that 25.50 range. All right, so that's Ethereum, still looking pretty good, albeit due for a slightly larger correction, but not that big, honestly. If we close above 3,000 this weekend, I think ETH is on track to continue higher. But I am looking for an entry in 2,800 range to fill that fair value gap. Solana, take a look here. CME gap as well. Obviously, that's been partially and mostly filled, but we still have a new gap being formed at that 162 mark we just looked at earlier. All that being said, we're still above our ascending trend. The daily time frame looks super strong. While we are diverging here for a second time on stochastic, that does imply more strength and more continuation lower. We do have a lot of support in this range of 150 to 155. So that's really the area that I'm considering the most amount of interest in taking along. As I discussed yesterday and the day before, that support range is a heavy interest for myself. So it's hard to want to FOMO in just yet. I think it's best to consider buying in with this most recent point of control here at about 150 to 155. So I'm going to start dollar cost averaging in that range of 150 to 155, pending Bitcoin isn't looking like it's going to take a nosedive at that point. Taking a look here at SUI. This is another one that a lot of folks really love trading. I do too as well. We have the inverse head and shoulders pattern, more likely to continue higher. If we take a look here, of course, we can recognize there's a distinct probability that we're going to go a little bit higher. In fact, let me pull up this other chart here. I think I got a better one here for us. And what we want to look at really quick is just understanding this current scenario, okay? So with these fibs here, potential for pullback to this 0.382 level is quite high. So I would say as a worst case scenario, once again, this is more of a macro understanding, is the $3 to 310, yeah, that area. Filling that fair value gap would be a solid consideration for long. So hypothetically, we get a pivot and a drop right here to break our descending trend. That would be a good consideration for long. And I know what you're thinking. You don't generally want to take a trade when you break a descending trend, but we've been seeing so many fake outs, and the fact that there's a lot of accumulation of volume at that range really implies that we're more likely to pivot and bounce off that level because there's heavier confluence there with moving averages, fib levels, and of course, that lower fair value gap that could get filled. So me personally, I'm considering an entry in that range. So I'm going to maybe reevaluate it at the 310 mark just to kind of get some perspective on that. Last but not least is XRP. This is one of the most highly contested or requested videos that I get, which is why you've been seeing me cover it pretty much daily. And the truth is, from a macro perspective here, we haven't hit our all-time high, of course. You probably already know that. But the truth is, the local high here when we had that massive pump and dump, $2.93 to $3 was roughly that range. Okay, and we're coming up to that. We actually rejected off that perfectly. So the common sense here is to understand that we're more likely to retest that level again here soon after filling lower gaps and or retesting local fibs. So the general consensus I would say is that this 272 mark right now where the price action's at, that is a support range. But if we lose that, we're more likely to retest our local highs of 230 to 245. I'll update our playout chart on our Twitter, Telegram, or Discord to give you some perspective on that. But the general sense here is there's high volume. You don't want to try to short against this. Even if the price does pull back, which I think is less likely, you're more likely to find success taking a long than you are a short. And at this point here, XRP is just looking super strong. You don't want to short against that kind of volume. Okay, so highly recommend you be careful with that. Let's take a quick look at the back-end liquidation data here for this coin as well. Just kind of give you some perspective on where we're at. So we understand open areas of interest as well as liquidation. Liquidation doesn't tell us too much here right now, but when we look at the overall sentiment for liquidation long delta, it's still very bullish. We got about 1 billion in liquidation longs. That implies we have more continuation potential to the upside, and that there's a lot of support here as well. If you look at this lower range, if you take a look here, you can see 275 to 280 is that those local areas of open interest. Those are going to work as a resistance if we continue to close below that. All right, so we're right now at about 270. So hypothetically, not a lot of support below us. So heaven forbid we lose this 270 range. The likelihood of continuation to that 230, 240 range is higher. Okay, so be very careful FOMOing in just now, but also don't try to short into that. I know it sounds counterintuitive because there's a probability we're going to pull back. You're much better off waiting for a long entry in this lower range than you are trying to take it long. All right, folks, I hope that makes sense. I described all that correctly. Again, comment below. Let me know if you like this format a bit better. I'll continue that if possible. I'm also going to start adding some fundamentals there, just some important little foundational things there. That addition will be added to my website here soon. If you're not familiar with that, it's cryptocash.tech. You do want to become a better trader? Feel free to reference the link down below. I've got Trade Academy, Community, and Signals Group. And if not, either way, join us on Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. Look forward to working with you. Have yourself a great rest of the day. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.